I really thought the Bernard Hopkins versus Keith Holmes was going to be something special to talk about because when you're talking about the 2001 middleweight tournament for all of the gold for undisputed, you have to understand the aftermath after the tournament. But understanding how it started with a whimper, and then you look at it and you think to yourself, well, of course something was going to happen because it's like there's no way that, with all by means necessary, that there's no way that Bernard was going to win the fight. But then you would have people thinking, well, of course he was going to win the fight. Like, look at his resume. Look how he fought. But when you look at anyone else from William Joppy to Keith Holmes as well, from Felix Trinidad as well, you have to understand those guys were in their 30s. Seriously. Because when Joppy and Felix first fought each other, Felix was only 28 years old back in May 12th, 2001, which is the event I'm going to review. William was 30 years old, straight on to his age. Like, nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happened. While last month ago in May of 2001, before the fight, Keith Holmes, not a young guy, he was 32 years old, while Bernard was 36. So, but again, Keith was a southpaw fighter, and Bernard was orthodox. And for Felix and William, betwixt them, they were both orthodox. So it wasn't like all of it was by means necessary. But yeah. Again, it's time to review for a moment the entire event from start to finish to understand what we got ourselves through. Now, this entire event, I'm not going to review everything about this, but with everything going on, these are all the boxing fights that I would ignore. So, an undefeated super lightweight fighter named Freddie Cadena won a 4-round decision against a 4-9-1 fighter to receive his 8th victory. Chantel Stanciel, a 17-1-1 fighter, won no contest as well, scored a 2nd-round TKO against a 15-15 Colombian jobber. 2 fights against some random nobody fighters from super middleweight to lightweight. 2 Americans scored a 4-round points draw and an 8-round points draw against a land down under and a guy from Central America. A guy named Felix Flores, a 16-2 fighter from Puerto Rico, scored a 4th-round TKO against a guy named Gerard Gray in the welterweight. But that's just mostly half of the information. So just to start from BoxRec, from bottom to finish, this is what we have here. Promoted by Don King Promotions, live on United States of HBO pay-per-view, live in Madison Square Garden. There's a lot to this type of historical environment that we got ourselves into. So, with all due to respects, this is the world of boxing that we are putting ourselves through. A historical event of understanding the leverage of legendary boxers at their finest. So the first legit heavy battle in boxing in this night today is champion, one of the top 10 greatest female boxers of all time in the 2000s and 1990s, Christy Martin versus Kathy Collins in a 10-round non-title fight. Unfortunately, this fight didn't go as pleasingly for the naked eye. Kathy Collins is a former IBA welterweight champion, an IWBF World Super lightweight champion, and a WIBF lightweight champion. She lost her first pro fight in '98 for most of the titles by a split decision defeat against a woman with a 6-3-1 record named Leah Mellinger. But Kathy went on, pushed her on in a few more years. She won the WIBA belt against Denise Moritz. Won a fight recently months later, and then against a nobody in a 6-round fight. And that's it. And her last fight in her career would be against Christy Martin. While Christy Martin, a 42-2-2 record, a woman who lost her first pro fight in her fourth career against Andrea Deschong, her first pro debut was against Angela Butchman, which was a draw. So that kind of suffered her career as a whole. But for some reason, she just kept on boxing through and taking on a bunch of nobodies. She had moments for some. She scored another draw in '94. She was taking on a bunch of other competitors. There was a time when she took on a stripper who pretended to be a pro boxer with a lousy 15-1 record named Bethany Payne, when in reality the woman's record is 1-0. If you Foxy Brown. And that woman she only had a 1-0 record. Yeah. It's like, with all due to respect, it's ridiculous, but you can tell what women's boxing could barely grow at the time. But she would have a win against someone named Lisa McFarlane, and of course that fight stated the fight was thrown, so I can't really say much about that. But the entire of her career was like goodbye. She had a tough fight against Tracy Bird, and let's just say that woman's career didn't do so well after that. But again, the point is, Christy Martin could not find a lot of competition. But again, I really can't say much about that due to respect. And that was also the same night during Holyfield versus Tyson 1. So, and Christy did lost the fight against Sumya Anani, another fighter from Missouri living in Kansas, who lost against a jobber or a hype job out fighter who is I'm going to talk about some other time. But Martin went on, fought hard, and became an opportunity to go for broke. But again, she couldn't fight for any titles, so she wasn't a champion at this time. And at this moment, boxing was already going to change for the biggest of it, pretty much. Surprisingly, the 10-round fight went on as expected. It was mostly just a great accession of work. Kathy managed to point out some okay movements from the situation, getting out with soft angle jabs as best she could. It wasn't like it was an opportunity that anything would have gone bad. It was a decent fight for what it is. The judges scored was, one judge had 95 even, but the other two had it 97-93 and the other 98-92. And Christy Martin wins the fight by majority decision. But what's interesting is that it was mostly all in the hip for what it was. Again, this is the time when Christy Martin was not champion yet, so again, this is her 43rd victory, but at this time, even scoring her 44th victory months later in November, and then it took her a year off from boxing until she took on Mia St. John, who is another unbelievable woman who also has 49 wins in her career, just like Christy. And the problem is she suffered her first defeat against a woman that had a lousy record, but showed her punching power. And of course, I'm not going to talk about that story, which is how controversial women's boxing was for that foxy woman. And that killed her career from losing against women like Jennifer Alcorn, and it's just other women as well in her career. And she couldn't become champion for a long time, losing fights until she finally became champion after defeating Christy Martin in 2012. And how that fight became wild enough, considering both of them announced their retirement. But of course, the rest of the story was just all ridiculous. But again, you could tell. While Christy Martin would go on to lose against Layla Ali for the IBA World Super Middleweight in 2003, lose against Holly Holm, Angelica Martinez, it was tough. It was tough. And she did have her first legit title win against Dakota Storm in 2009, which was her first world title win and her only one, until she lost in the rematch against her. And of course, that's another interesting story moment we'll talk about some other time, which that last fight was a non-title fight. But again, a year later, it was all crazy. So it just goes to show you how tough women's boxing was, mostly for Christy Martin. Yeah. For the IBF USBA Heavyweight Championship, Chris Bird versus Maurice Harris was nothing much of a just a tune-off fight. At this moment, Chris Bird, he is just not in the game plan as much anymore. The 12-round fight wasn't much. It was just an interesting win to take out for all means necessary. The problem is, with Maurice Harris just onto the journeyman zone, yes, his last 6 pro fights have been 5 wins and 1 defeat, but that doesn't make anything different. Even his loss against Derek Jefferson, which was that fight known for how Maurice was about to defeat Jefferson, and then Jefferson pulled his arm back and just slammed this heavy punch that knocked out Maurice's mouthpiece out. And Larry Merchant pointed out that famous comment saying, "I love you, Derek Jefferson." Only months later, Derek Jefferson lost the fight after that. So you can tell how heavyweight boxing in America was already getting worse by the minute by each year in the 2000s. So, and also keep this in mind, Chris Bird was already losing a fight in his career at the time, and he was not even being picked to have a good fight for a title until he defeated Vitali Klitschko when Klitschko had his arm broken after the 9th or 10th round, and even when he was winning by points, and Chris Bird became champion. 6 months later, he lost against Vitali's brother Vladimir, and both brothers won. He won a fight last January, while in 2000, Maurice came out with a couple unanimous decision victories against some nobodies. So at this moment, there's nothing interesting about this fight. The fight went 118 to 109. 2 judges had 117 to 110. Chris Bird, this was just an easy win. It was nothing much to talk about. This fight was part of the IBF Heavyweight Elimination Tournament, where the winner would face David Tua, who defeated Darnell Nicholson in the 6th round just last March. While even though Bird did floor Harrison in the 6th round by an interesting knockout punch, which I'm not going to get into details about it because this has nothing to do with the middleweight tournament. So I'm just going to squeak by these fights as quickly as possible. But all in all, the fight itself wasn't all terrible and advanced. It makes sense. Vernon Forrest versus Raul Frank for the vacant IBF World Welterweight Championship is just another random fight that doesn't mean much. Yes, Vernon Forrest, 31-0. His last pro fight ended in a no contest. The no contest was actually Raul Frank, where last August the 26th, the same day my second birthday came, unfortunately did not produce a winner. It was actually suffered enough because the fight ended when the bout was stopped in the 3rd round due to an unintentional clash of heads around halfway through the 3rd round, and the fight was a no contest. So they're fighting for the belt again. Again, at least this fight had more of a clear winner. 2 judges had it 118 to 110, 120 to 108 by a wide win, and Vernon Forrest would become champion. Unfortunately, the IBF would not be too kind to Vernon Forrest, by all means necessary for the welterweight. Just because it was, it didn't have anything to do with him being stuck in a situation. Because keep this in mind, Felix Trinidad, who defended the belt 15 straight times, including his WBA belt he won at the time. Because keep this in mind, on March the 10th, 2000, Felix Trinidad vacated the title just a couple months before every fight. And again, like the fight itself was in August the 26th, 2000, which was for the vacant belt. So it was like 5 months before the fight when Felix vacated it back in 2000. So it's been over 14 months now since having this fight happen against the Joppy fight. Vernon Forrest would win on the belt, but he would actually strip the belt for announcing that he wanted to fight WBC champion Shane Mosley instead of mandatory Michel Petriucio, who would also go on to defeat Corey Spinks in April the 13th of next year in 2002. Only a year later, Corey Spinks would win in a rematch against him, have a few title defenses, lost against Zab Judah in 2005, and after Zab Judah had one successful title defense, he had a controversial fight against Floyd Mayweather in 2006 with that controversial low blow, and with Floyd Mayweather's cousin, Roger Mayweather, almost getting him disqualified for attacking the crew. So yeah, there's a lot to it about the IBF being on hold for that. It's ridiculous. But again, Vernon Forrest would go on to defeat him twice in 2002 and lose against Ricardo Mayorga twice in 2003. And the rest of his career, well, he would try to suffer on. He would barely win again by winning a super welterweight title, lose against Sergio Mora in 2008, win in a rematch against him, and that same year, only to retire. So I can't say Vernon Forrest's final years is that entertaining. Like he fought back hard, won the fight, and his last fight ended with a bang in a title fight. So as for all this going on, and with Raul Frank, who's actually from the country of Guyana, I gotta give him credit. He tried his best to be in the situation. He might have not been in the spotlight as much as he should, but he had some okay opportunities. He had a great win against Purcell Miller in 97, but his losses in 92 against the same fighter and someone else he lost before in his debut, or in someone else's first few years as pro. And even after having a couple fights with Rodney Jones years later for the IBF light middleweight title eliminator, it kind of stinks that he never had that opportunity again. It is what it is. And by the way, speaking about Michel Petriucio, who would also go on to win that belt for the IBF belt, as we talked about, he would also be in this show as well against a fighter named Elio Ortiz. Unfortunately, this fight did not go 12 rounds. Neither 6. Not even halfway through. The technical decision was actually around more than a few rounds, more than 4 rounds. The fight went on like it was just a complete waste of time. In the 4th round, it stated that the fight was stopped due to an accidental headbutt, causing both guys to stop the fight in the 4th round. We don't got timer or information of that, but again, we can only say to ourselves that this was it was just an accidental headbutt. You can understand where you have 2 guys going forward, you know something terrible is going to happen because you can't read a boxer's mind on what their move is going to be. If they're going to go forward, what are you going to do? Are you going to back away? At the end of the day, it's hard to know who's making the move first. So at the end of the day, I really can't argue about these people getting hurt. It's just, it is what it is. So I really can't argue about that. Pretty much, there's actually more to that than meets the eye. But again, I'm not going to get into the information because, again, this has nothing to do with the main event that I'm here to talk about. So I'm not here to review this episode from all the fights. I'm sure all the fights were interesting, but 12 rounds of boxing in multiple fights, that's not what I'm here for. No. The second last fight to be reviewed is also by another Puerto Rican. Yeah, there's 4 Puerto Ricans. We did talk about Felix Flores and Freddie Cadena, the first fighter that won his 8th pro fight by 4 rounds. And now it's Daniel Seda, an undefeated 16-0 fighter, takes on Nana Yao Konadu, a 41-4-1 fighter from the country of Ghana, who's had an interesting 16-year in pro boxing. Interesting enough, because he was the former WBC Super Featherweight Championship and a 2-time WBA Bantamweight Championship, having some tough fights to win back his title against the same fighter, and losing against Johnny Tapia. At this moment, he's had some great moments in his career. Some of the victories he's won might have not been with great champions, but again, he's had his moments and fair shares. And as an African fighter, he's showed the country that they can show themselves that they're tough fighters. Unfortunately, his career would come to an end here, because after his defeat against Johnny Tapia, I wouldn't say that his career was going downhill. Like, he continued boxing the next year against Hector Acero Sanchez by an easy 10-round fight in Massachusetts. And then on December the 2nd, 2000, he won a round 5 TKO victory. Also the same night where Felix defeated Fernando Vargas for the IBF Super Welterweight title. But again, that was just the end of the era there. And when I say end of an era, that was also the same night where Ricardo Lopez won his legit 50th pro fight out of 50 pro fights, because his third last fight was a draw against his rival opponent, who goes by the name of Rosendo Alvarez, which was a technical draw, but won in a rematch, and then he vacated the belts in 98 to take on Will Gisby, and that was the end of the minimum weight title fight for Undisputed. But continued doing it all for the time being, so it wasn't a waste of time. But with all due respect, his victory here that night against a Thailand fighter was nothing much said. Again, William Joppy was there that night as well, so nothing much could be said about that. But again, that was a great victory for Nana. He won a round 5 TKO against some random journeyman fighter. Not better than his last victory, but you do what you gotta do. Again, it took him a year and a half to get back to the ring winning that fight. So at this moment, this 12-round fight didn't go as well as expected. Daniel Sosa went into the fight, and he just found easy opportunities after opportunities. He went in there, boxed his way forward, and just called it a day. He called it a day and just said, that's enough, because there was just no point on continuing. Nana did okay for what he did, but Daniel was in the fight like never before. He fought his way through tough competition. And this was also for the WBA featherweight title eliminator. So Nana is trying to fight for his third weight class at this moment. And as for Daniel Seda, he went in there and just fought big. He was trying to fight for a legit championship in his career. But it kind of stinks that Daniel Seda, who defeated this great fighter from the African continents, could not be successful than nada, because after this victory, things changed. Like, he barely scored a split decision against a guy named Roger Medal on September the 29th, which is going to be the event I'm going to review next month. So I'm going to get ready to talk about that fight. Yeah, and it's going to be the night for the middleweight tournament. So I'm going to talk about that fight and understand what went wrong, because later on, Daniel would go on to score out a technical draw due to an accidental headbutt, win a couple more fights against some random dudes, only to not fight for a world title. He failed to not even, like, this was for a featherweight title eliminator, and for some reason, the fight never happened for the WBA. So I'm still questioning why they never gave Daniel Seda a title fight. Even before 2004 and 2005, when he lost against Joe Casamero and a jobber named Silverio Ortiz a year after the Casamero loss, only to win more and more fight and then retire. I don't know. I feel like Daniel Seda became a big bust, but somewhat of a victim in boxing. But it is what it is. All right, so with all that being said, let's get down to the last fight. Felix Trinidad versus William Joppy for the Middleweight World Championship Series. This fight was for the WBA and IBF Championship. So the tail of the tape, live on HBO, 28 years old Trinidad, 30-year-old Joppy, 5'11 for Trinidad, an inch higher than Joppy, 74 reach advantage for Trinidad on a 72, 159 and a quarter, 158 and 3/4 for Joppy. 165 tonight was for Trinidad, and Joppy was 170. So the weight differentials on that is somewhat interesting. And their last total punch fights were pretty much on the cusp, depending on their percentages. For total punches in rounds, after Trinidad took on Vargas and Joppy defeated Cherry Fee, nothing much for the punch statistics onto that for it is. Even power punches were around the same percentages for both of them in their fights. So there is no 3 knockdown rule, no standing 8 count. Referee can only stop the fight. Again, blah, 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 blah. Can be, not be saved by the bell. At this moment, those are all the rules. All rules different, blah, blah, blah. Technical decision doesn't exist. Again, the rules for boxing at the time, I really can't say that those are fair rules. But again, I guess it might make sense for it, but I really can't go out and say it that way. But again, so just to make this fight go on closely here, with everything going on, the entirety of this whole fight, Trinidad, I will say this though, Trinidad walks into the fight. He has 19 title fights, 15 of them by KO. I love that Trinidad and his entire team have their great headbands, have the more perspectivefulness. He has the great perspective of everyone out there. Respect for him. It's weird that last month ago, Bernard Hopkins comes out wearing a blackout mask like he's working for the white supremacists of the KKK or something. I don't know. So at least Trinidad is dressing up in a more respectful manner here than we speak. Again, with a good record in his career with 39 wins and 32 knockouts, he's like the unstoppable fighter of a champion. As for William Joppy, he comes out with amazement, with a red, white hat, the hood covered in dark blue. The strap of the belt that wraps his clothing coming in is the blue and stars. 32 wins, 24 knockouts, a draw, and a defeat in his career. That one defeat was controversial, which would come into an undefeated fighter, which should have been a draw, but again, we won't get to that. It has nothing to do with it. I have talked about before. The judges tonight, which we won't care about because they have nothing to do with this fight, Stanley, Guy, and Melvina. Stanley Chris, I'll just call him, it's a long name, is from South Africa. Guy Jutras is from Canada. And Melvina Latham, a female, is from the USA. I don't think it matters. The entire fight comes in. Both of them announce on the fighters. We also have Arthur McCanty Jr., who is also the referee for this fight. And speaking about McCanty, his father, McCanty Sr., who also ref fights before and once ref with Muhammad Ali, McCanty Sr., I don't think was here that night, but his father, McCanty Sr., is about to retire from being a referee on September the 29th, the same day where we have the final tournament for this middleweight fight. Which has nothing to do with it. But again, we're going to have great retirements and surprising moments next month to talk about. But again, and of course, yes, McCanty Jr., this is the one that we talk about. And by the way, I heard that Trinidad hugged Don King and hugged other people before someone gave him his mouthpiece. Weird. But yeah, Mercanti Jr. is the one that was involved with the Yuri Foreman and Miguel Cotto fight and how controversial that was in his career, but it is what it is. So yeah, both guys come in. Nothing controversial about this one. The fight starts out evenly decent. Both guys are starting out jabs, both leading off the left foot. And again, let me look through my notes. So coming out through a few rounds of the fight, Williams starts out hot with throwing out some jabs and heavy punches to the body at some point in early of the first minute. And out of nowhere, while thinking that he had Trinidad on the hook and point here, it's like nothing was about to happen. He's leading off, going forward, giving Trinidad a hard time at one point where he pushes him barely to the ground, pushes his head down, and starts attacking him offensively. And Trinidad, being calm and collective, waiting for the opportunity at any moment, decided to go forward quickly, just like Kristen Panga did to Anthony Joshua when he went crazy in the beginning part of the fight. Only Trinidad did the complete opposite. Yes, he used a lot of his energy early into this fight, but coming into the 1 minute left of the fight, he finally throws a couple jabs in and hurts Joppy, but Joppy comes back forward, throws more left jabs, and then a heavy left hook comes in by Trinidad. He throws out a right. The crowd in the background are screaming bananas. He throws another two-punch combination, another left, right onto his temple, or his chin, I call it temple, and he scares out Joppy. And then with only just about under 30 seconds left of the fight, the crowd are standing up into the background. Trinidad finally puts in the offensive. And for some reason, Joppy feels like he's about to push Trinidad away. So when he does it, he puts his hands down like this for no reason, only for Trinidad to give him a couple more heavy shots and a heavy left hook. And down goes Joppy with 15 seconds left. He tries to get back up. He loses his bounce onto the rope and gets back around the count of 5. Mercanti finally takes the count, tells him, is he all right, and continues the fight. And Trinidad goes in, charges at him with a heavy right, left, and more multiple punches until they start clinching each other. And Trinidad is grabbing him by the face like crazy until the bell rings. And Mercanti grabs hold of him and in the last moment. It was a scary moment. It really was. It was pretty scary. The knockout, the punches, and the reason why William Joppy put his hands down, not thinking that Trinidad was going to do nothing dirty to him. Come on. You don't do that. You don't do that one dang bit. I just found that to be the most idiotic thing I've ever seen. By all intents and purposes, it was the most dumbest thing ever. And it just gets worse because in the second round, both of them, he starts jabbing through as best they could from left jabs. Joppy's still coming in the beginning part of every round, just flicking off his jab as best he could and going forward from clockwise to counterclockwise. It doesn't matter where they're going because that's the entire full minute of the fight. They're just pushing forward. And if Trinidad found the opportunity, he would land a hard punch, a heavy cross, or even a hook with his left punch, mostly a hook. He did try to throw an uppercut around 1 minute and 15 seconds of that round, but missed. And Joppy started dancing around seconds later, trying to dog away this or that. And like nothing would really happen in the second round. It was just mostly just an easy tune-off for each other. I really can't speak English at this moment, but again, both of them steady each other up until Trinidad finally throws some good punches. And it seems like every single last minute of every round, Trinidad goes for the attack. He finally throws heavy punches in the last minute of the fight. He misses. Joppy tried to throw a heavy right punch and missed, and even throwed a couple more. But nothing was said there. Trinidad gets the round easy, and the bell rings. And then we come into the third round of the fight, which gets even more ridiculous because coming into the third round would be Joppy's best round of to date. He comes in, finds the opportunity, and he outboxes sort of Trinidad, which is weird because Trinidad started in early into that round, started heavying some punches here or there, And then Joppy comes in, finally lands some punches, throws out some counters and some interesting uppercuts. And then Trinidad throws a punch right into his body, and Arter warns him to keep his hand up, to not punch in the low blow. So Trinidad kind of, I would assume it was an accidental. But yeah, Arthur McCanty warns Trinidad for it, and they let the fight continue. There were some clinches in the fight, but not a lot. So it wasn't a dirty fight. It was just mostly Joppy trying to flick the jab. But the third round was pretty much interesting enough for both guys landing out their own combinations. But Joppy found the opportunity. He managed to throw out more aggressiveness into that round. He got some good pushback in the last minute of the round and put on a good show, throwed out some great combination styles on Trinidad. And at this moment, you can say to yourself, maybe Trinidad was coming back, and maybe he was. He finishes the round off with a bang, which was a great round for him, and nothing said, done. And then we come to the fourth round where Joppy got the better round of that fight, and before you know it, you think to yourself, well, Joppy's coming back. Nope, because for some reason, Trinidad comes in 1 minute into the round and he starts throwing out some heavy jabbers, and he pushes Joppy back, throws a left hook, and Joppy goes down in the first minute. At this moment, the crowd are just waiting for a finale here. Like, this was the best fight ever. It was a great fight for what it is, but unfortunately, Joppy starts clinching Trinidad, and they clinch so much that he's trying to stop himself from not getting knocked out. There was a moment halfway through the fight where Arter breaks up a clinch, and then Joppy puts his hands on the corner of each rope, waits for Trinidad to come forward, and grabs him and puts him back in a clinch to the ropes again. And that would be the entirety of the fourth round after the knockout, because the last 2 minutes was just Joppy trying to save his life in that ring. But of course, he couldn't survive as much. He was getting hurt in the fight, but he was trying his best to survive as best as he could. Again, it was another round, 39-35 score for Joppy. Again, the trainers are telling Joppy to make a fight out of it, but again, he just couldn't find the works. He couldn't find nothing to save himself. He just wasn't better than Trinidad. Trinidad was a better fighter that night, and he just couldn't find nothing there. So eventually, the fifth round comes to an end where both guys are now putting out all of the work onto each other, but Trinidad's doing the more painful punches at him. Halfway through the fifth round, Joppy is moving out his head back and forth so much in a tired formation that I can assume that Trinidad is getting tired. And because Joppy starts throwing multitude of punch combinations back and forth from left, right, more than 10 or 20 punches at him, and then coming to the last 55 seconds of the round, after throwing out a couple more punches here, there, more here, and then there, he's tiring himself so much that Trinidad sees him tire himself out. And then when he sees Joppy has his hands down when he's throwing a punch, Trinidad ends it, lefts out a left hook, misses a right when Joppy goes down. And at this moment, he loses balance because he gets back up, he falls to the ropes again, and when he gets back up, Mercanti Jr. realizes that he's stumbling so much that he just waves the fight out at 2 minutes and 25 seconds. I will say, though, it was a good stoppage. Joppy showed a lot of heart, but I think you can already tell that William Joppy was just not in the right state of mind that night. It was a great win, nonetheless. It was a great victory for Trinidad, but unfortunately, this would be his final great victory in his career. It would be crazy that we would have to wait a few months later until September the 14th or September the 12th for the fight, as him versus Bernard Hopkins was set to take place. Let me double check. September the 15th, live in Madison Square Garden, Bernard Hopkins would take on Felix Trinidad for the undisputed belt. Or would they? Well, the last thing I'll say about this fight is that even though I'm just going to end this video here or there, I will say, though, Felix Trinidad had a lot of greatness in his career. 40 wins, that's just legendary. Great job for William Joppy. He tried, but it just wasn't good enough. which makes you wonder that people were favoring Trinidad to become the undisputed champion on September the 15th against Bernard Hopkins. But unfortunately, that night was going to change 2 weeks later on the 29th. And that is where I'm going to end this episode here. My final thoughts are, what are we seeing in the world of boxing? All I see is, this is it. This is going to be the greatest thing ever. But we're just going to have to wait for it when the time comes. So with that being said, thank you viewers for watching this episode. We're going to see you guys in the month of September. I have a couple interesting episodes to talk about September of 2001. It's going to be crazy, so stay tuned.